Welcome to the space where we're exploring a vision for how to live well in the things we can't help but face. I'm Jason Jensen, and I'm here with my buddy Pete. Pete, thanks for joining me today. I feel like we've been talking a little bit already about what we want to discuss today, but to put it in context, it's the next episode in our series on work and how to inhabit it and how to think through it, and as it relates to vocation and all of those kinds of things. And one of the aspects of work that we haven't fully covered yet or haven't really addressed is the idea of authority, or we could call it power, although authority, power as it relates to the workplace. And oftentimes we're entering into dynamics where people have a real authority that we have to learn how to settle underneath. They're either a boss or a manager, and sometimes you are a boss or you are a manager, and how to hold that sense of authority well when you're trying to care for people. But there's a lot of people who I know who are entering into work, and the alignment of how their boss sees the world and how they see the world is not the same.
Sure.
And so how can we inhabit those kinds of situations in a way that we can find peace and productivity and all of those kinds of things? And I want us to lead up to a question of what we can do about that, or maybe as a thought exercise is what could a conversation or a dialogue look like with your boss in helping them see the fruitfulness of how to hold that potentially slightly differently, especially if the boss that you currently have has a mindset that more control equals more productivity and more, output that he believes benefits and things like that. So that's kind of where I want to enter today.
Good.
Anything you want to say to kind of kick us off in that space?
Other than just how relevant a subject this is, because one way to describe a central feature of human life is dealing with authority, and also trying to discern where it resides and how it ought to be deployed and all of those things. But right from the jump, we come out of the womb and we're met with the matter of authority, and that we have caregivers and people who preside over us. And so it's a subject that is worth the time taken to figure out how to inhabit it in a way that's faithful and generative. Yeah. So I like the focus.
Yeah. One story I heard really recently of a woman I was having a conversation with is that she was actually on stress leave because she had landed her dream job, close to her house, in the skill set that she knew, in her work context. There's a whole bunch of different roles, like there's a variety of roles, and you can start in one role and kind of shift into different ones. And she had landed the one that she wanted the most and felt most suited for. And 6 months after she was there, her boss got replaced. And it went from her dream job to her worst nightmare in the way her boss was treating her. And it was so violent in some way. So it wasn't physically violent at all, but emotionally violent. And there was like racial undercurrents in this, as this woman that I know, she's an immigrant, and so she's from a different culture, and that was subtly applied against her, which that is awful in and of itself. But the majority of it was just things like criticism and the force of which it came of how the work was judged and all that kind of stuff, to the point where she said, I can't continue. I'm having a mental breakdown in this. And this is not a gentle she's a gentle woman. She's not a soft person that's incapable in any of those ways. She's actually quite robust as a human being in her emotional capacities and things like that. And while she was off work, she's articulating the incidents that happened to her, to what in our area here is called WCB, or the Workers' Compensation Board, and they manage these kinds of cases where somebody's off leave and an employer, because of a workplace, it could be an injury or a dynamic and all that kind of stuff. And so,
similar to OSHA in the States.
Yeah. And she's articulating all the incidents that happened to her, and this WCB employee says, well, you're going to have to return to work. And employers, they don't have a mandate to be nice.
That's right.
And so the whole dynamic is missed in the current culture of how we enter into work, where we have to figure out how to inhabit or navigate that kind of thing all over the place. But it would be good for us just to expand that we're not only talking about an incident that was like that, we're also talking about other places that hurt, maybe what it's like to be micromanaged, what it's like to have pressure applied to you in a situation where you feel like, this is not what I feel is right to do, but I'm being commanded to do it. And maybe you can expand on, some of the things that you're aware of or that you've seen, and where this kind of thing, how authority is held at work, can really be painful in a way people listening to the podcast might resonate, so we can enter into it more deeply.
Yeah. Well, the initial thought I have, that's a great setup for us. Thank you for walking us into that way. It strikes me as you're talking about all of this, that every conversation about any problem in human life is always also, whatever else it may be besides, it's a dialogue about human character. And just how there's no substitute for that. If we don't have the characterological dynamics of human life front and center in our awareness, people are going to get hurt, And
when you're talking about characterological, you're talking about things like virtue and having good character. And
the character of the person we encounter, and the character that we bring to our neighbors. And none of what we experience as blessing in that space is accidental. People don't become wonderful selves by accident. They have to choose very carefully. And the bosses that wreak havoc, that enter into a space like the one that you just described with this precious woman who's found her dream position. If only she had an authority figure above her who knew how to let her inhabit that space to her maximal potential. And just how stark an experience it can be when one person is substituted in the flow of those dynamics and the violence that is wrought in that space. and it's a characterological issue. And so it just strikes me that you're speaking to something that's universal in its implications.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we will find ourselves in a place of employment. We will have people over us. We will be met by a range of character capacity in that space. And we'll have to learn how to navigate it. And the learning how is a central feature in our own characterological growth, if we allow it to become that. So we're in the territory of the common experience for common people, and that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and that this dynamic is so universal that I would say it's inescapable.
Mm-hmm.
I would struggle to find a place where I'm not under authority in some way, shape, or form.
That's right. Yeah. So you're going to have to contend with it.
Yeah. So where have you seen it hurt for people outside of the ones I mentioned?
Well, if I think in sequence, I go back to my initial experiences of work, and those were all in blue-collar spaces, and whether it was on a farm or on a job site. And male authority is its own thing, and blue-collar male authority is its own kind of hierarchy. And there's a lot of value in having to learn how to navigate that as a young man.
Mm-hmm.
And there are forms of violence woven into that are kind of instantiated into the culture and then accepted as part of the culture. And so it's not only in the individual case, you end up having the enculturated dynamics,
right?
Different domains of life and work.
Like hazing and things like that
that's
occur
right.
in that space.
And it's not as simple a matter as to say that there can't be a space for any of that. Because one thing that's happening, and you kind of see this in increments of intensity or gradients of intensity around risk in those spaces, like legitimate, the prospect of legitimate physical risk.
Right. Like if you're on an oil rig.
An oil rig is a classic example.
Or a fishing boat.
That's right.
Where there's life and death consequences to.
That's right. Yeah.
To those kinds of actions.
Yeah. Or you're, on an industrial construction site, and there's a lot of big machinery there. And the consequences of a mistake can literally be deathly. And everyone there is kind of carrying that tension together. You might be building a large building, and it might be the day that you're flying the trusses in with the crane. And if you don't have your ducks in a row, people can die, and damage can be done to what's already been built, etc. And so how do you hold the vulnerability of risk in a way that begets order and composure and readiness and preparedness? And there are a lot of ways into that, but the ways that tend to be habitual and reflexive are by force of will, right? Forced compliance. And where some of the hazing comes in those spaces is, and where there can be room for this, but we have to kind of retool how we might imagine some alternative to hazing.
Yeah,
that still
initiation.
Serves it. That's right. Initiation is great language for that. The male impulse there, the masculine impulse to come down hard initially on somebody is a form of testing. And what the elder statesmen or the people with authority in those environments are trying to do, even if they can't articulate what's happening in the kind of non-conscious psychological dynamics in that space, is they're trying to weed out prima donnas. They're trying to find the weak link in this mix, because shit can go sideways awfully quickly. And we need to know that you are able to withstand pressure. And so we're going to induce that before the real thing comes. And where it goes sideways, and it very often does in these environments, is where there is glee taken in a malicious kind of way, through the working out of one's own undigested emotional state, glee taken in the pressure given. And that's the difference between initiation and hazing, I would say, is where the pressure applied goes beyond what can benefit the work. And there's a particular kind of delight taken in that. And that's its own thing that in the main men face in these construction environments. And I remember facing it myself. And it was an immense test. You know, you show up at 18 years old and the guys running the show are my age, you know, mid to late 40s. And you may be the dog that they kick at the beginning of their day. And they may want you to do some very difficult things simply because they had a bad morning, you know, and they may give you a little extra work to do because of that, or send you into a task that you're not prepared for, that endangers you. And, you know, I can remember being sent up as a young man onto a 50-foot 2x6 wall to mark out a beam. And the only reason I was sent up there was so that the older fellas on the job site could have a good laugh. And this is before we were tied off and had lanyards on everything. And so you're up there in the wind on this beam, hoping you don't fall on either side into a clump of frozen ground and rebar, you know. And I can still remember their jeers as I was trying to find my footing, and I didn't have a ton of experience walking at those heights up there in the wind. And that was a mistake on their part. You know, they should not have done that. But how you face those moments and what you choose to bring into the scenario will have an enormous effect on what is brought into you for the rest of your life. And there are ways to...
What do you mean by that?
I mean, you're going to be formed by the experience.
Yeah, and so what I think you said, but help me make sure that this is what you said, is shouldn't have happened to you. However, how you face that will benefit or not benefit you for your...
That's right.
For the rest of your career, even though it was a form of violence for them to send you up into that 50-foot wall.
That's right.
In unpreparedness, but you can still inhabit that in a way that you can take something out of it. Yeah.
You're being measured there. And there's a certain part of you that is nascent, or it hasn't yet emerged, and it's going to emerge against the backdrop of this pressure. And that's how we grow. And to a large extent, you know, we've become a litigious and a very cautious isn't the right word, but a preemptively protective culture in that sense. And we eliminate so much of that from young people in a pendulum-like reflex away from some of the more violent instances of what should have been initiation but became hazing, right? And DEI mandates and all of the things that we're turning over in modern culture and trying to reconcile with are part of that reflex. But to show up in that space and be met by that adversity, and to have to, so to speak, stand and deliver on your own, to meet the adversity and to keep your composure in the midst of it, to be tested and to challenge the test in the parts of it that were beyond initiation and more aligned with hazing, to speak to that. That's all fresh territory for a young person. And the response given in those moments can actually serve to benefit you for the rest of your days, depending on how all of that shakes out. So I do remember a lot of those encounters in the blue collar space. And that's one in the masculine space where we can conflate power and authority. And power is simply the implementation of force or the potential of force. Authority is something more than that, right? It's knowing how to hold that potential in ways that can actually be constructive. And it's the understanding that everybody has around you as the one with that authority, that you do have that potential in you to be drawn from in relevant and necessary ways when the time calls for it. So in the blue collar space, it's too often merely power. And how to address power is a central challenge in human life, right? And what to do about it. And I don't know how much of that you want to go into now. Or
I mean, I think one of the questions that come up with is like, young Pete gets told climb up that 50-foot wall.
Yeah.
The idea of agency or the ability to choose comes up immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And on some sense, it really feels like if it's that situation or many others, not only in the initiation process, this idea of agency is on the line,
mm-hmm.
right? Do I actually have a choice here?
Yeah.
And when agency gets removed, it becomes very fracturing inside.
Yes.
As we try to go about being productive,
mm-hmm.
right? So but if we stick with that example, although I think this example is everywhere, can I choose in some of these things?
Yeah.
Even in some degrees, it's like, can I choose to do it the way I think would work?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and that's not to say we're not willing to learn from people who have done this over and over and over again. And there might be a well-established, better way to do things that we need to enter into with humility. But often there are tasks that have a wide variety of ways to be accomplished. And can we choose in that? So this idea of choice or agency, like, can I act in the way that I know to be best for me and for others?
Mm-hmm.
What happens in a scenario where they're saying, hey, go climb the 50-foot thing and put your life at risk?
Yeah.
Can you say no?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I can tell you now with the vantage point of hindsight that in that particular instance, that could have gone very, very badly.
Saying no, or the 50-foot?
The
task.
The task.
Yeah.
And it was extremely reckless. You know, what I haven't said is that it was minus 27 and that it was almost first thing in the morning. And people who have experience in the prairies know that you get that first bit of sunlight on a icy beam. And you're going to have a pretty slick scenario up there. And, you know, putting an 18-year-old kid in frozen steel-toed boots on top of a 5.5 inch wide span in a howling wind at 50 feet in the air is a recipe for disaster in the truest sense of that phrase, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the yes that I gave in that instance was more an act of faith than it was a clarified consent within me, because I didn't have the experience to know that I ought to say no in that situation. And it's possible that at that age, even with the experience and the knowledge that no would be the better thing, that I may yet have said yes in order to gain the social capital on the job site that I felt I needed, right? And so I don't want to give some heroic view of, any kind of clarified understanding of what was going on. I said yes to something that I ought not to have. And the risk that I was facing on that day was that I may well have lost the job had I said no. And that's a familiar pressure for a lot of men in that space. Are you prepared to do all of these dangerous and reckless things in order to gain the social capital and develop some kind of a reputation as stalwart and strong and tough and all those things? And those were all a part of my misunderstanding of masculinity at the time, as they are for so many young people. And by grace, I didn't fall off the beam, and was able to mark out what I was supposed to and make my way back to the main wall and, withstand all of the laughing and everything else that was taking place on the ground. I can tell you that as a 47-year-old man, if I were on that job site witnessing that, I know what I would do now. And I would speak to every one of those men and tell them we're not sending that boy up onto that beam. But there weren't any of those kinds of men on that job site. And so the merit in what happened that day is that I faced the matter with courage. Okay? It wasn't like the drunk soldier, waving a sword and running out into battle. It was a measured decision. I'm going to do this. And the other, I suppose, merit in the scenario was that when I got back onto the ground and took in all of their impersonations of how I was walking on that beam, I took it in with mirth, and I accepted it and embraced the moment in that sense, and imparted to them that I can handle this, right? Now, one of the hazards is that more of it's going to come. If you prove that you can handle it, more of it's going to come until such a point as you speak up. And
right. But in that too is, had you not taken it in with mirth, especially in masculine dynamics,
that's right. They've identified
aggressively more of it would have come, because it activates you, and they're gonna try and force that out of you as quickly as possible.
That's right. And around the matter of safety, they're going to force that out of you either by it being purged from you as a sensitivity or your elimination as a presence on the job site.
Yeah.
Right? So, but we've got to pull this back into agency, and we've got to pull it back into moral injury and character and all these dynamics that we're talking about. And I suppose it's worth speaking to the matter of just how you face those moments, in this case as a young man. And one of the things that didn't happen in that scenario was looking to be made a special case of, regarding oneself as having certain rights that ought to be attended to by the authorities on hand that amount to some kind of coddling, right? That notion that someone should be immune or protected from the dynamics of being tested just like everybody else. And so to face that moment with courage and to represent a different manner into the environment. And maybe a valuable part of the story in the longer outworkings of it was that it wasn't more than 3 weeks after that instance where one of the guys on the job site who did have character, man who became a dear friend named Rolly, he saw the way that I took that moment and was tested by it and wanted to have me along on the projects on this larger job site because of that, because he saw something in the way that I faced it. And he was over 10 years my senior. And so, I looked at him as an older man, even though he would have only been
28
in his early 30s at the time. And I ended up working with arguably the most competent carpenter on the site. And my rate of growth because of that moment was accelerated because of who wanted to have me accompany them in the process of the tasks that we were all facing together. And Rolly and I became friends. I ended up standing up for him at his wedding. That moment was catalytic, right? And so opportunity can come and authority will be extended to you based on how you stand in the midst of the tests that come your way in such an environment. And I would say, as I look back on that younger man, that one of the things I didn't surrender on that day was my dignity, right? That was kept intact. And a mere fraction of what I was feeling inside emerged. I had to hold that at bay. And there are moments under the great pressures that you feel as a young man where, everything from tears to violent rage could have come out of me. But knowing how to keep your composure and learning how to keep your composure in the midst of those kind of social and human storms is such a valuable part of early life.
Yeah, even non-social. And
that's right.
Like you got a wasp's nest in your garden shed and you're like, I have to face this.
That's right. Speaking to something recent, are you?
Well, it happened last summer,
Okay.
but you know that feeling of like, well, I have to calm everything inside it down. So
yeah.
I can see, I don't want to go too far down the tangent of character, and you get to hold your dignity in that. And it can arguably said that you're not creating moral injury by going on that beam. They're putting you in a dangerous situation.
Right. Yeah.
But what happens when you feel like somebody's putting you in a scenario where you're like, oh, like doing this feels like it's compromising something inside of me.
Yeah. So if the guy at the end of the workday on that very same job site says, hey, I need you to help me load these 3 2x12s into my
truck.
Into my truck.
Yeah.
And, how do you handle that moment? And there's a scenario where the young man is right to say, no, you can handle those on your own, right? I'm not going to join you in that process. And you'll if you're entering into the trades or going into blue collar spaces, it's a guarantee you're going to be met by that challenge. Mm-hmm. And you are being tested in the realest of ways in those moments. And it's not that if you've chosen wrongly, you can't turn the corner and choose rightly the next time. It's not that it's a one-shot deal, but it is that you're going to be tested in those ways. You're going to run into the ocean of conflicting characters that you meet and the people out there.
I don't think that's a uniquely blue collar problem.
No, it's not.
Right?
It's not.
It's
maybe more visibly and physically tangible in that space.
Yeah, tactile in some sense. You know, like I have to pick this thing up. But I feel like the subtle ones are like when you think of reporting with accounting.
Yes.
Right? There's
billable
so much
hours,
flexible in it.
Yeah.
Well,
or
that would be another one. But
taxation.
And the flexibility of even the story that it's painting.
Yes.
Like to, what do they say? Lies and statistics, or, like that kind of idea happens in accounting all the time. It's like, oh, this data can tell multiple stories. I can manipulate it in order to do that. And you can get into a room where your boss wants you to manipulate the data in a certain way to tell a certain story that, based on everything else that you're seeing in the room, is not the truth.
I was reading a survey just yesterday of academics, and it was, they were guaranteed their anonymity in their responding, but over 50% of those surveyed who responded admitted to fudging the statistics or the numbers in their research in favor of their grant pursuits. And that was among respondents. And so the number is much higher. And what we're talking about sullies every aspect of professional life. So I'm with you. It's not restricted to blue collar spaces or economics. It's there in academics as well. It's everywhere. And we said we don't want to go too far into character, but it's back to that statement at the beginning. Every conversation about any matter, humanly speaking, is always also a matter of human character. It's a dialogue about human character and the quality of that character.
Yeah. So what do you do when you're in a room and you're preparing a report?
Yeah.
For some sort of authority figure that you have to present to, but the authority figure that's in the room is saying, this is what I wanted to say. And you know that not to be true. What do you do in that kind of scenario?
Yeah. Well, hopefully that scenario is preceded by some prior dialogue. If you're met with it in the moment, I suppose it's as simple as, a refusal or a compliance. But I think the greater likelihood is that you will have been in dialogue with your boss in advance of the meeting, and the boss will be indicating, or the authority figure will be indicating, we really want to present this outcome. And if the outcome that they wish to present is not there in the data or in the product, then you're faced with the matter of telling the truth about that.
And I think maybe to add some experience in this is going, it doesn't always have to be diametrically opposed.
That's right.
When you bring it up, right? I think that's maybe some learned wisdom of like in groups like that, right? And some of that is in a vulnerable way. Like sometimes I can be caught up, just like I imagine many people can be caught up with like, oh, is it saying this thing that would really benefit me?
Right.
And it's more of a question, and you're like, hey, the data is saying this. And the kindness of somebody to come back and saying, do we really feel like it's doing that?
Yeah.
As an open question to somebody, gives somebody the opportunity to be clarified within themselves.
Certainly.
And I think that is a gift, and I think that is loving. But just being able to ask a question as opposed to saying, this is wrong and I will not participate in it, often can be set only to serve you in some ways. And in that way, it serves no one.
Yes.
Versus, hey, guys, girls, team, like, it seems to me that a version that is more accurate to what's happening is this alternative.
Yeah.
And what I've found helpful in those situations is to say, man, there might be something we're scared of. Can we name what we're scared of that wants to lead us to saying that it's saying this other thing that's kind of true, but not the truest of true? And what would happen if we actually faced that thing together? And that has led, in my experience, to all sorts of beautiful and fruitful conversations that unlock creativity that you would not have had before by actually looking at the thing that is true.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. If I try and put a frame around that, it sounds like finding the human story inside of the task and never letting the task itself, or never living in the illusion that there is such a thing as merely a task itself. That there's always a human story happening in the midst of the task. And, any of us who've had to navigate dynamics, for example, if we're parents, dealing with matters related to teachers and our children is a space that this occurs in. And
that never happens.
Yeah.
Teachers are wonderful human beings with full characterological development.
That's right. Yeah. And just like our kids are fully
little saints.
That's right.
From the womb.
Yeah. So in those kinds of spaces, you can sometimes be met with disciplinary dynamics where it's almost as though the authority figures in the mix have an equation. And they're saying your child didn't fit into the equation here. They didn't do the task, or they stepped out of bounds in this way. And kind of a very mechanistic view of things. And to find the human story inside of the task or the dilemma would be to say, well, what were both people bringing into the mix out of their lived experience and the enduring story that is both of these people's lives as they've come together on this matter. And we don't always have time in the very fast-paced dynamics of modern life and corporate life to give a full view to that. You can't enter into, makeshift therapy sessions with people to unearth their subconscious with them.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that we can't ask questions that invite more awareness and more reflection about what other human dynamics may be at play here in this moment. So finding the human story in the mix, I think, is very, very important.
Yeah, I wasn't fully tracking were you saying that in a scenario where your kid has a story and the teacher has a story, and trying to find, instead of saying, this person has made a moral judgment over something that might not be moral at all. Like I wasn't quite tracking what you were saying there.
No, thank you. That does need clarification. Sometimes a teacher's not even thinking about it, in this case, teacher, as moral. They're just thinking about it in terms of mechanism. They weren't inside of the grid of students in the way that I prefer for the grid of students to act.
I see.
Okay? And they were out of step, right? And we just need them to get back in step. And that will suffice me as authority figure. And in those scenarios, there's a bigger story happening than simply in or out of step with the mechanism.
Right.
You know, the mechanics of a classroom.
Yeah.
There's the subjective experience of the child, the story that they're living, the story they have of their teacher. Yep. There's the story the teacher has of the student. There's all of those dynamics at play. And to reduce it simply to autopilot kind of function is a reduction that can't serve anybody.
Yeah. So you got a teacher that likes the classroom running a certain way.
Yeah.
And when somebody doesn't act in alignment with that certain way, it can come in the form of discipline.
Yes.
But it's not discipline unto actually a good. It's actually untowards a preference.
Yeah.
Right. And so we enter into situations like that all the time.
That's right. Forced compliance.
Right.
And then, you know, that becomes a interesting reflection on sources of creativity.
Well, and that's where micromanagement comes into, immediately.
That's right.
Hey, I have a preferred way for this task to be done, even if I'm not the one doing it, where it's like, oh, well, I'll put, that often stifles the individual genius that can emerge from someone else.
That's right. Yeah. And so I sent you some reflections from a great thinker, Ian McGilchrist, a couple days ago or yesterday, whenever that was. And so much of his work is about left and right brain insight and the fine work that he's done there. And people who are familiar with his work as a neuroscientist and a philosopher, and prior to that as a linguist and a poet, just an incredible individual. But he makes the very astute reflection that we constructed a left brain society, and the left brain is the part of us that wants the quickest path between 2 points and thinks in terms of efficiency and particularity. And, it's the part of us that reaches out and grabs something. And McGilchrist gives the analogy of the whole brain and the whole of awareness as a stage, and the left brain being like a spotlight on the stage. And the right brain is taking things as wholes, right, as entireties, and seeing them in a systematized and contextualized way, and always looking for more context. And so the right brain tends to be the part of us that is expansive because it's open to divergence. And creative environments are ones that have space for divergent thinking, not just convergent thinking. But in the mechanisms of the modern world, we become so driven toward convergence that we don't have a lot of creative space for thought in a lot of the work environments that people inhabit in the majority of their days and with the majority of their time. So in those kinds of dynamics, there's the threat of moral injury, but there's also the oppression of the demand to think in particular ways, right? To comply. And if creativity is something that we're gunning for, then it would certainly be worth inviting a different mode in those environments. But I may be taking us too far afield there.
No, I want to go back to a story really quickly.
Sure.
Just maybe a practicality where you're like, hey, there's a story. And in our workplace, we've had to redesign models when we're in startup phase, and then you get out of startup phase and you got to redesign a model and you say, what do I believe is going to be true about the future in some way, right? We're faced with that dilemma often, as people go through work and have to plan into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And as it relates to, and as we've done that, we've developed a mantra
Mm-hmm.
that I think people could find helpful. But this idea of we can act like orphans.
Right.
And an orphan is one who can't settle underneath, there is no settling underneath an authority figure who loves them and cares for them. And so they have to figure out how they are going to grasp or clutch at things in order to do that, how they're going to have to fabricate what might end up happening and all that kind of stuff. And
in the absence of a guarantee on providence.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we'll have to break that down too. But the idea is I'm on my own,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the mantra that we developed throughout those periods is saying no orphans in the plan.
Right.
Where we can invoke that statement and say, are we lying to ourselves? Are we operating in this way that we feel like we have a fear that we're not going to get taken care of? We have a fear that that if we don't have the success, then we have no meaning or purpose, or and all of those kinds of things. And it's been tremendously helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that every plan that we've ever had has been, orphan dynamic free. That's not the case at all. But it has healed that as we've matured in our planning, it is based more and more on what is real, what is true.
Yeah.
And what is good, and maybe not necessarily what is beautiful, but like all of a sudden, if it is those three transcendentals, better things kind of come out of your planning.
That's right.
And as it comes back to creativity, it's like, maybe if we're just talking to somebody who employs people, right, is creativity is one of the most human faculties that we have that can, when oriented towards the good, create value, right? Like real value. Mm-hmm. And some of that is financial value. And we have a, left brain society that wants to think his value is only in terms of money.
Yeah.
But real value in the terms of goodness, creativity, enjoyment. And so when authority refuses to allow that to happen, I actually believe the long-term consequence is that you create less value.
No doubt.
And that would just be something that we could hold out to people and say, hey, that's a real reason to dialogue about this with people.
Yeah.
Because when authority is held in that way, micromanaging actually costs you.
Yeah.
Right? As an employer. Holding tight grip on control would be the other thing that is kind of coming out in that is, but creating the freedoms of that expansion of divergent thinking leads to all sorts of breakthroughs and product, creativity, all sorts of stuff like that, to the point where like, and I'm not, baptizing Google here by any, but they give, one of the things that helped them create the company that they are today is what's called 20% time, where an engineer could work on whatever they wanted for a day a week, essentially 20% of their time.
Yeah.
And in lifting that kind of constraint, it allowed things like Gmail to emerge, and all sorts of, I can't recall off the top of my head. And
so they established a clearing for divergent thinking,
Yeah.
right? And go figure, new product and new innovation or innovation occurs in that space. I was thinking that as you were talking about micromanagement and what I was describing before as, force of will or drive toward compliance, there's a very particular anxiety in those kinds of environments. A lot of mutual surveillance begins to happen, right? You see this in families with lots of children and authoritarian parental styles. Don't upset mom or dad as the high bar on why we're doing what we're doing instead of the inherent value of the thing.
Yeah. So the kids start policing each other.
And so the kids start policing each other, and it becomes a high demand, low trust environment. We've talked about that in previous episodes. But you see that emergence in any of those kinds of environments. It's just at scale. You see it in the modern West in the policing of one another that took place during COVID, for example. And, larger and more systemic and caustic examples of that with the Stasi in post-World War II Germany, right, as an example. And it just strikes me that if we take the analogy of a garden, and you take the micromanaging authoritarian boss put them in the place of the gardener, what they're doing is sterilizing the workplace, and it's functionally equivalent to coming in with Monsanto and saying, well, we're going to modify the gene on this particular seed, and it's going to be the only thing that can grow in this ecosystem. And we're going to eliminate everything else. You end up with something that's unnatural, right? And in the human space, it has that function as well. We're meant to be able to inhabit ourselves in our places of work in ways that can benefit the work. And we can't do that except creatively, right? There is no true personhood that isn't also spontaneously creative. But how much of modern life is about nullifying people's creativity in order to have them function in a particular way with a particular utility? And so people as commodity will always have that effect, right? And the authoritarian boss very often is one who is prepared to view employees merely as commodities.
Yeah, we get the term human resources.
That's right.
From that kind of culture.
Yeah. It's an interesting double entendre there. Human resources, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to take us in a direction where I was chatting with another individual recently, and the idea of what reminded me of that was you talking about the large family when they authoritarian, and then they start authoritarian parents, and then they start policing each other.
Yeah,
it's like
surveillance culture shows up.
Yeah, and then so I'm not quite speaking to that, but I am speaking to where there is how honor is held with authority in workplaces, and oftentimes people might find that they're operating in a culture that has a limited honor or a finite amount of it.
Yeah.
And how we hold that as individuals and how we can break out of that is pretty powerful. If you think of like collaboration is actually co-laboring with people. Oftentimes we hear that word in like modern, especially creative spaces of like, oh, collaboration, that's the best. And it's like, yeah, it is. But without honor being seen as an abundant thing,
Mm-hmm.
it starts to breed competition,
Mm-hmm.
right? And competition with the person I'm supposed to be co-laboring with destroys collaboration. And now we're in competitive dynamics
Right.
on people on the same team. Like if I'm, and we'll see organizations where they pit teams against each other to try and drive more performance or
No
more things like that, which can be very good short-term things. And I'm sure that there are people who are experiencing that in their workplace even now.
Yeah.
But one of the ways that you could, as an individual, start breaking that down is that culture down is actually to be a force of encouragement.
That's right.
And why does that make sense? Because if you start encouraging your teammates, however they might be presented to you, and freely sharing what is what you know to be ways for them to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, if you did this, I think your whatever it is would
improve.
Yeah. You know, that can quickly start to change a culture if you set yourself to it.
You know, a place where I think there's a beautiful analog, and one that, when it's properly held, can be quite a source of inspiration for professional environments. And there are versions of professional environment in this context as well, but in the space of martial arts and competition, and what happens in a dojo that's presided over by a man or a woman who has fine character. What they're doing there is leveraging the dynamics of competition for the sake of everybody there. And competition itself isn't the thing that is problematic. It's the view of the outcome that everybody holds together. And if we're all there to improve, which presumably you are in a dojo, then all forms of competition are going to be aimed at the collective growth of the participant members. And so you're going to have more junior members, right? The proverbial white belt that don't have a hot clue about how to resist the first hold or to try and enact it themselves. And they may be pitted against a master, a black belt, you know, in that space. And if it were the case that the master of the dojo is lacking in character, well, then you're going to have a scenario like the one we talked about, where you send an 18-year-old up on a 50-foot beam when they've never walked one before. And they're going to meet a particular kind of destruction that can't serve anybody. Or they can be brought into competition with this sage for their sake. And competition can be leveraged as a good in that sense, but not without the proper framing of it. So what's the purpose of the competition as it's hosted under the roof of the organization, et cetera? And what's our vision for, what's the goal? You know, what are we citing as a win for the individual inside of the collective? And organizations that are presided over by people who don't have a predatory kind of instinct, but are settled well enough within themselves to be able to freely encourage, because they know themselves not to be losing a thing and gaining everything every time they do encourage. Those can become extremely generative, competitive environments, right? And yeah, I've witnessed those. I certainly witnessed that in the construction space too. every once in a while you come across a crew of, in residential framing, you don't have enormous crews in the way that you do in commercial work. And so it's, going to be somewhere between 1 to 5 men or men and women.
Yeah.
And the tonal dynamics, when you just cruise past a job site of men who are in competition where everyone's got a shared goal and everyone understands that I don't win if you're losing, that kind of spirit, you can feel that energy when you walk onto that job site.
Right. And it could be things like how many nails per minute I'm able to hammer into the beam or whatever, which requires some skill and whatever.
Yeah.
I think of like something that happened recently is the 2-hour marathon barrier got broken in real competition. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. By a guy, last name is Sawe, and he ran it in 1 hour, 59 minutes and 30 seconds.
What an accomplishment.
In the London Marathon, which is not even the fastest track, like Berlin and Chicago are usually considered faster tracks.
When did this happen?
Just Sunday.
Okay.
Just last Sunday.
Wow.
So, and the guy who ran the first unofficial sub 2 was a guy named Eliud Kipchoge, and just wonderful man. And both these men, from what I can see, seem to be very humble. But if we're in a game where honor is finite, we say, Sawe, he has all the honor in running now, long distance running, because he's the first sub 2 marathon guy. But that's not actually how the running community seems to hold this thing. They actually go, wow, we honor Eliud Kipchoge because he was one of the first people who had the space. He was a pioneer in the space. We can even go all the way back and honor Roger Bannister, who broke the first 3-minute mile. And I don't run that much, so I'm not, like how fast, whatever. He broke the first sub, minute mile, and it's actually that we can honor the thing. And I thought about this too when I was playing rugby as a kid. I was like, I'm never going to be a Springbok in South Africa. I'm just not, by virtue of my size and whatever.
Sure.
But I am contributing to South African rugby by playing to the level that I know how to play to.
Sure.
Because anyone who has more giftedness in that way can then they can rise because I'm right there pushing them, right? Mm-hmm. And if you see a culture of honor leading all the way up to the Springboks, and as South Africa carries that as a nation, it's like I can actually be proud for participating in rugby, and in some degree for the attention that I give rugby as a South African, right? And
that's a unique depth of thought for a young man to host within himself. And I'm just delighting in that right now. The thought of young Jason out there just giving it everything on the field. And
it's one of the areas that was immediately obvious to me that I couldn't win at.
So what does meritorious participation look like if I can't win in the standard way?
That's correct.
Yeah, good for you.
And so, but in that sense, it's like, more of life is actually like that if we hold it differently. If we can look and say, how do I enter into work?
Could we say most of life?
Yeah, we can. My hesitation is like sometimes it's actually just not held that way.
Oh, I was saying
more life can occur when we hold it that way, or all of life can occur more joyously.
All of life is a matter of being met by the reality that your expertise are exceeded by somebody else's.
Yeah.
Right? A humble view of life. The moments where you're the expert are very, very rare, right? Just very, very rare. And to surrender to that as an opportunity is a kind of that's the kind of surrender that leads to a young man saying, I can still play this game with incredible value. And that's a very beautiful thought. But to get in front of people's minds that we're surrounded by the imagery of expertise, and we're surrounded by the imagery of, the star athlete and the expert economist, etc. More than any other period in history, the peasant is faced with the expert and with commentary from the expert. And if we're not careful, I suppose, we could become mistakenly sympathetic to the view that if I can't be an expert, then I can't participate, right? And the sober surrender that you as a young man gave to that in the domain of rugby allowed for the moment to still nurture you. And all things are like that posture that I'm taking to this is that that's true in every domain of life. There is somebody who can play this game better than I can.
Yeah. I was talking to my son recently, and he's taking to chess.
Wonderful.
And chess becomes problematic when you have a world champion in Magnus Carlsen who has dominated for as long as he has.
So humbly.
So humbly. And there's a random story about how he created this chess.com account called The Drunken something, and like still won and had an elo of, a crazy high elo.
Yeah.
But my son starts playing chess and goes, I'm never going to become Magnus Carlsen.
That's right. Which is a fact.
Even though he's very bright. And so the way I was able to father him in that is going, we can still push, like maybe he has the capacity to be a grandmaster.
Yeah.
That's still a potential. He's very, very sharp. But I said, us becoming the best at the world in a domain is actually us becoming the best at the world at being us.
Mm-hmm.
And he has an interest in writing. He has an interest in, a bunch of other places. And I said, look, if you pursue excellence in chess, that's great. You might end up being able to write a novel with the intricacies of chess available to you, or even the strategic thinking that you might take into an engineering job, that all of that is going to serve you without this demand of honor being finite, where we can enter into something and actually go, wow, you're wonderful at chess in the small community that you find yourself, as opposed to the grand stage that is all of chess players, in the masters of whatever the thing is that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And often so many times at work, when authority is not held well as it relates to honor, which honor is this dynamic of like, how do I give proper attribution to the contribution of somebody and the weight that somebody might be holding above me, right? But when we're able to enter into that, then all of a sudden we don't have this very narrow view of it's grand master or world champion or nothing.
That's right.
We have this ability of saying, look, I can actually enter into encouragement with my colleague in a way that the summoning that I can do through encouragement of them being more them is only going to benefit everyone else. And as we've talked about vocation through some of the other episodes, it's that now all of a sudden vocations aren't seen as competitive and it's a dog-eat-dog world. Now it's vocations are additive.
That's right.
And you becoming you actually benefits me.
Yes.
And that would maybe be, if you could have a conversation with your boss and get him to see that in whatever way, I think that would make your workplace, you would have less sick days, not because people want to be there, but also just the stress level in the whole place would be radically reduced.
That's right.
And you mentioned Adam Grant in another episode.
Mhm.
I think he actually makes the case in his data that that is true.
Oh, it's factually the case, yeah.
And so as a boss, you're like, oh, I can have people show up and not just show up in a cog in the machine kind of
That's
way.
right.
They're showing up in very creative and collaborative ways. And if you think of like, it just ends up in these beautiful environments in which when authority is held well,
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of the garden analogy that you talked about, all sorts of things can thrive. And that doesn't mean that discipline or in the analogy pruning
No,
needs to take place in order for things to emerge, and
That's
that they
right.
can't be towards a singular vision as
Mhm.
you were talking about in the dojo. It just becomes a better way to enter work.
Yeah. And I think maybe it's worth saying because it's natural. A person living out their vocation is an instance of a thing being that thing.
Yeah, it's aligned to how it was made to be.
That's right.
That's what you mean by natural.
That's what I mean by
Yeah.
natural. And there's no escaping that. There's no corner of the universe where that is not immediately beneficial to the broader ecosystem. And so to trace with a few of the themes just from today, just tracing back a little bit, you gave your son a right brain reflection to a left brain demand.
Mm.
Become grandmaster is the only way to play chess, right? And the only reason for playing chess. And you just blew that up in front of him into myriad opportunities. And the thought I was having is, man, I'm sitting with a good father here.
Oh, thank you.
Just beautiful.
What's amazing about how what happened post that conversation, which I think is good to reflect on, is it was in a moment where he was wanting to put chess down,
Right.
and what ended up happening was more exploration took place
Mm-hmm.
because he didn't see losing as failure. He saw losing as exploration.
That's right.
And attempted to create his own opening in chess, and then he started studying openings and like being able to try those out with his friends in a way that didn't mean he was ascending or descending his value,
Right.
but actually just expanding his universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this actually changes how we live life.
No doubt. It in the truest sense of the term, reinvigorates, right? We become invigorated again. And this is another valuable reflection for the workspace. You imagine a person going and presenting these vocational themes to their job or their boss rather. And as you said,
Yeah. What
trying
what
to
do you
get some
do?
purchase there,
Yeah.
right? Around that concept that if we find ways for everyone to be themselves in the work, to bring their unique gifts and capacities, we will have a richer work environment, better products, lower attrition rates, all these things. But another thing to reflect on is the matter that so many business owners are properly obsessed with, but at a loss for, is investment. Investment. Are my employees invested in the work? Or do I have to try and find ways to motivate them? Well, if you want an invested person, let them be themselves in the work that they're tasked with doing. Condition yourself in relation to your neighbor, even though they're your employee, by studying them well enough to say, how can I leverage the bespoke genius in this individual? Because everyone's got their own particular genius inside of their calling. How can I leverage that for the sake of the work? And how can I bless them in that? And there's your opportunity for encouragement again that you were speaking to. Investment is such an important aspect of our daily lives. I was asking my son yesterday, he had had the opportunity to mow the lawn for 8 days. And every day it passed, he was making more work for himself because grass grows, especially out here. And we had to have a talk about investment just before he started mowing the lawn, right? Because he was aware he'd left it. He was aware that it was going to be more laborious than it would have been 8 days ago. Probably, 2.5 times as many trips to the grass bin, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing that began to happen is, as I was witnessing, and we had to have a timeout, was you start treating the equipment more violently because you're frustrated that you're there. And now everything is experiencing some net cost because the frame that you have for the work hasn't located the value in it yet. And there's value in mowing a lawn well, right? And so my eldest and I had that chat, and all of a sudden you can hear it tonally. I could hear the difference in the lawnmower, at distance, knowing that, okay, he's taking a different approach to this. It was stalling out less often, for one. But it affects everything, right? And the difference in work environments between an invested population versus an uninvested population are so stark and so immediate. And so why wouldn't we want to bless people in those territories for the benefit of everybody?
Yeah. And if I was going to talk to a boss, I'd say, hey, what is the cost of turnover as it relates to investment?
Yeah.
And it's like, how long does it take you to train an employee to gain enough institutional knowledge to be able to do this? 6 months, it's not short, right? And the wrong hire in that space, we're talking real dollars, right?
Yes.
Like when this is not the case.
Yeah.
That affect the bottom line.
Yeah, proven capital gains, for sure.
Yeah, so the other thing that I would mention to a boss is trying to get around the idea of short-term gain into medium and long-term, right? And that's a tough one in the culture that we live, especially if you're in some sort of publicly traded company that thinks in the terms of quarterly earnings. And that feels like a massive lift, change. But however, I know in Canada, most people are employed by small businesses, small to medium businesses. So it's not all necessarily that case. But the idea of on the medium to long term, when we invest in these kinds of things, it's not just that they will, when we create a culture that's not led by authoritarian, and gives people a true sense of liberty, right? Like an ability to fall within the structures, but have freedom within them, have agency, have dignity in the work, have, hold it in a way for creativity and all that kind of stuff to emerge. Opportunities come out in the medium to long term that wouldn't have been there before.
Yeah, because you're investing in longevity.
Yeah, well, and just if you think of a curve, if we're only trying to have a linear growth quarter to quarter, and you're just trying to hit that growth, and that has to hit in order to be sustainable, the opportunities for things to emerge that can actually be cumulative in value creation become limited.
Yeah.
And so I would try to be convincing with the boss, and that would be helpful. But once they see that, then they can start to make choices in these things with how they're holding that as an opportunity. But what would you, let's assume it's a dialogue. What else would you try and have a boss see? And maybe as it relates to moral injury, you know, how preventing that, like maybe what would be helpful is talk about sales, where the pressure to manipulate to hit your quarterly or monthly numbers.
Mm-hmm.
How do you hold that as a tension?
Well, I'm probably not the right person to ask that question, because my approach to sales wouldn't be a demand to sell a product. It would be an attempt at finding a fit between the utility of the thing that I'm selling and real need. And an evaluation about whether or not there is enough of that real need out there in the world to justify my continued efforts in this space and sufficiently take care of my family's needs. That would be kind of the range of considerations that I would bring into that space.
You're probably too much for this podcast.
That's right.
But we should talk about that.
Yeah, but just on the question, maybe we can get to sales in a second and tailor it into that space. But the conversations that I would have with authority figures of any kind, but especially in the corporate setting, where we've talked in these previous episodes about the way that people shut off their humanity, feel justified in doing so right before saying business is business and I'm going to do X now.
Right.
The conversation I would invite with an authority figure in the corporate space is to ask what sort of self they're going to become in the mix. And does the way that they think about investment involve themselves and the sort of person that they're going to be known as when all of this is said and done? What are you taking out of this personally? And what are you bequeathing to the people who come after you, whether it's your children or your extended community, etc.? Because we forget that there's multiple stories at play when we're at work. And the tasks that we give ourselves to are not the only part of the story. The self I'm becoming in what I give myself to is the other part of that story.
Yeah, so a left brain thinking would atomize or into,
That's right.
Oh, I'm only this person at work.
That's right.
But what you're saying is you would invite sort of a broader picture of saying, hey, you can't be this way with decisions at work and then change magically on your drive home and be somebody different with your wife and kids.
That's right. A mature and grounded mind knows that nothing is separate from anything else. It's so much a symptom of the mechanistic mind of the modern Western self to think, for example, that we can genetically engineer mosquitoes and it's not going to have any effect on the rest of the ecosystem. The hubris in that is just it's so glaring, you know. And that is in effect the way that we treat modern business as well. We silo these products and services and imagine that whatever we do with them in this space won't affect everything else. And that becomes the permission we grant to ourselves not to think about everything else. And it's dim-witted and it's nearsighted, and in its effects, it's actually violent and caustic.
Another way to say that would be, if you could find the space in relationship with your boss, is to say that his heart is at stake in all of this
Bingo.
too.
That's great language.
Yeah.
And to not adopt the view merely because it's in fashion, that there are certain things that ought not to be discussed in these spaces. If it's a human issue, it ought to be discussed, because that ought to be front and center, you know, because nobody benefits if the humanity in the mix is lost. That's a universal, right? It's part of the ontology of things. No matter how things shake out in our mind, the human person is always going to be the central feature in the consideration, either as an agent of growth and benefit to everybody, or by way of their neglect as an agent of violence and net cost, you know. So emphasizing the human story inside of the work that's being done, and inviting authority figures gently through question, through petition, you know, may I have some of your time? There's something I think is important. I actually care about you in this mix as much as I care about my station and its duties. And I think there might be a better way. A good boss in that space is going to welcome and bless those kinds of pursuits. And someone who's diametrically opposed to them will resist them, and may do you the service in that moment of firing you on the spot.
At least you get severance.
At least you get severance, and you
Right.
get to go find some domain where these things are properly prioritized. And we can imagine, you know, it may feel like an abstraction to people. This may feel like a bit of pitch and toss in terms of fantasy. I don't think it is. But imagine, you know, 60% of an employee base in a given domain adopting that view and going to that boss, and that boss firing 60% of his employee base. Well, eventually, that boss and his pursuits or her pursuits get taken out of the ecosystem that is modern business. And that's how things begin to change, because individuals took responsibility for their lives, right? And regarded their neighbor as one that they had responsibility to, even if that was uphill.
Yeah. Maybe another thing, because I hope that people who are managers or, you know, bosses or whatever are listening to, is there is a strategic advantage to acting this way.
Yep.
And so you're going to find people who want that, who are very talented and willing to apply themselves and diligent in their work, looking for more places that hold this kind of ethos in the mix. So, as an encouragement for those who are under authority, but those who are with authority, that this is just a better way to try and inhabit, you know, authority as it relates to how you hold power, how you what control looks like, you know, negative and, you know, positive.
What forms discipline takes.
Yeah.
Right. Such an important aspect of all of life, human growth and development, period. What form does discipline take? And we should probably do a whole series on that as it relates to parenting at some point, you know. But those are our first experiences of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We download a lot of messaging in those spaces that
yeah, sure. You call it punishment instead of discipline.
That's right.
You're off to the races on, you know, one track or another.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. I feel like there's a lot in there. There's probably way more we can talk about, but that feels like a good spot to kind of stop and let all that digest.
I'm thankful for the time and the talk, Jason. Yeah. And I appreciate the way that you guided us through the considerations, and we were able to hit the beats that we were today. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for contributing.
You bet.
We'll see you next time.
All right.